Good evening, everyone. It's Courtney Bennett with Mid-Michigan Now for Crime Unveiled. Now, typically we would be here on Tuesday night, but because of the election tomorrow, we're doing this on Monday evening instead. Now, last week I did an interview with someone from the DNA Doe Project, so you're going to hear our conversation in a little bit. So what they've been able to do is they've been able to solve cold cases. So she'll talk a little bit about the way that they are able to solve these cases and how it keeps the cost low for law enforcement. I'm going to go ahead and get this interview started. I'm joined right now by Jennifer Randolph, who's with the DNA Doe Project. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me. So let's just get started. What is your role within this project?
Hi, Courtney. Thanks for having me. So my role in the DNA Doe Project is really to shepherd cases that come to our organization from start to finish. So I am with the case through their entire lifespan, from that first call from an agency who needs our assistance, all the way through to the resolution and the beginning of any press that might go out about the case that's been resolved.
Talk to me a little bit about what the DNA Doe Project is.
Sure. The DNA Doe Project is a nonprofit humanitarian organization, and we exist to help law enforcement, coroners, and medical examiners when they have cases of what's called unidentified human remains. So people who have passed away, but we don't know who they are. Sometimes these people are called Jane and John Does, and that's where our name comes from. And we assist them when they've tried everything that they usually do to figure out who someone is, but all of those methods have failed. They can come to us, and we provide what's called investigative genetic genealogy, a relatively new technique, to try and help them resolve the identity of the individual. And we do it as a nonprofit humanitarian organization pro bono. So we don't charge for the genealogy research that we provide.
How important is something like this for law enforcement and for these families?
So it's important for both of them for sure. So on the law enforcement or medical examiner side, they often are very, pinched when it comes to budget, and they have to make some very hard calls about where their dollars go. So if they have cold cases of people who they haven't been able to identify, those often can't be a top priority. Understandably, there might be more pressing issues. So we are there to be able to be a resource for them and provide this service. And also, if they can't afford the lab work to get to the genealogy phase, we'll try and pay for that too. So we're sort of that safety net to make sure that these cases get the attention they deserve, even when funding's short. And one of the reasons this is so important is exactly that, for families. In many cases, we have families who have wondered for years, decades, or even generations what happened to their loved one. They just don't know. It's an ambiguous loss. Are they okay? And they just don't care about me anymore? Did something happen to them? There's just no resolution, and it's an extremely difficult situation for families. And while we obviously aren't going to be able to give them the answers they want, at least we're able to give them an answer, and they can begin that grieving process, and their loved one's remains can often be returned to them.
How has the evolution of DNA collection and kind of that testing, how has that helped in these cases?
Well, not that many years ago, this wasn't something that anyone really even dreamed of. This technique really didn't come about until 2017, with our organization starting in late 2017. And there are a few factors that made that the case. One of them is it just has become a lot more inexpensive to perform DNA testing. This technique relies heavily on the fact that lots of members of the public, and certainly some of your viewers, I'm sure, have taken what we call a direct-to-consumer DNA test. So that's like a 23andMe or Ancestry DNA test, just to name a couple. And they had to get to a place where they were affordable, right? So that, people get them at the holidays or whatever. And so, there was sort of this critical mass of people taking these tests and putting their information in databases. And that's what allowed this technique to move forward. So I think it's the technique, the cost of DNA testing coming down. And then on our side of the equation, right, we're not dealing with living people who can take one of these tests. We're dealing with remains, often skeletal remains that maybe have been outside for years. So they're degraded and contaminated, and they're very difficult samples to pull DNA from. But labs are getting better and better at being able to get DNA from these very challenging samples. And the amount of DNA we need now to be able to sequence the entire genome of a deceased individual is very, very small. We're talking, picograms, which is hard to even fathom what that is. With just a few cells worth of DNA now, we're able to sequence the whole genome. And that's the information we need to create the profile that we then can compare to members of the public who have tested. Just as an example of that, Courtney, we can now use rootless hair. When we first started our work in 2017, that wasn't the case. We had a lot of skeletal remains that failed again and again in the lab. But then a lab pioneered the technology to be able to get DNA from rootless hair, which no one thought really would be possible. We could revisit some of those cases when they had hair, and now they're resolved. So it's evolving as we speak, and I think we'll just get better and better at dealing with more and more challenging samples.
That's so interesting because people oftentimes, they take those DNA tests and they're just doing it to find out their background, their history, but they could be helping solve one of these unsolved cases up until now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's important that, when people do take one of these tests, they understand all the benefits and all the risks, right? You always want to read those terms of service. And then if you are interested in helping our work, you do need to upload your DNA profile. It just ends up being a little text file, but you need to upload it to the databases that we are allowed to use, where we can upload the profiles of our Jane and John Does. And those are limited, and they tend to be on the smaller side, of course, so that makes our work a little more challenging. But those are GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Justice. So you can only, if you're interested in helping our work, you can only do that if you upload your profile to one of those databases.
For you and working on these cases, what does it mean when you see that it's been solved?
It's always, I think, bittersweet. You sort of know when you're getting close, and it's pretty exciting because sometimes we've been working on cases if they're difficult for even years. So to finally get to that point where you're solving the puzzle is really gratifying. But you also know that as soon as you provide that lead to the agency you're working with, that a family's going to be getting a knock on the door and receiving some difficult news. So I think bittersweet's a good word to describe it. I think it's gratifying for us. We very rarely are having any direct contact with families, but we often hear back via the agency who brought us on that, once the shock wears off, because again, these families often have been, kind of waiting for years and not knowing what the situation was, and suddenly they get this, news. I think once the shock wears off, the feedback we get is that they are very grateful because they can have some sort of, I wouldn't say closure, but at least, a resolution to what the situation is. So then they can sort of process it.
You mentioned about that resolution, that answer. Is that why the DNA Doe Project exists?
Yes, I would say we have sort of two goals. One is to give answers to these families who, again, are living with this very difficult, ambiguous loss and very painful situation. I can only imagine what it's like to be a mother, for example, of a child who's missing, or a sibling, or to be a child who's grown up into an adult thinking their mom left them because they didn't care anymore, to finally understand what really happened, right? So giving answers to families is very important. But we also think that just in terms of human dignity, it's important for these individuals to get their names back, get their identities restored, and to be laid to rest with that name because their lives matter. So that's also, I think, something that really motivates us.
Is there ways for the public to help out to donate to the DNA Doe Project?
Sure. There's sort of three main ways people can help us if they're interested in supporting our work. One is to just get the word out about our organization. We're on social media, we have a website. The other is as a nonprofit organization, they can help support us with a tax-deductible donation. We run on a shoestring budget. We have about 80 very talented genetic genealogists who donate their time and talent to work on these cases. So we really do operate just on a shoestring budget so that almost, most of the money that comes in as donations can support cases, again, for those agencies that don't have the money to do the lab work. So that's very important. Each case costs, by the time you do all the lab work and you pay fees to upload, thousands of dollars, easily, $5,000 to $8,000, depending on the case. So that's a lot of money. We have some great donors, who give us $5 every month or $20 every month, and that's what's kept us going. But the demand, as agencies hear about this technique and how effective it is, the demand really now surpasses what we're able to bring in. So I have a long list of agencies that need our help. So donations are much appreciated to serve that end. And then, of course, the last way people can help we've already touched on, and that is by uploading their profile to the databases we're allowed to use.
When it comes to those cases, how many do you all have right now?
So right now we have about 100 cases in the pipeline. 50 of them are in the genealogy research stage, and another 50 are sort of stuck in that lab pipeline. Some of them have failed a couple times, so we're just waiting for technology to get a little bit better to try them again. Others are, making their way through the pipeline. It takes months. Typically, you have to, extract DNA from whatever it is we have to work with, and then we have to sequence it. And then we have to use bioinformatics to sort of clean up the data, since again, these are challenging samples with issues like we talked to about degradation and contamination. And then we have to upload them. So that all takes quite a bit of time. But we have about 100 what we call in the pipeline. And then we've been able to provide leads that have been confirmed in 130 plus cases.
Wow. In 130 plus cases, that resolution for the family, that's it.
Exactly. That's 130 families that finally are able to know what happened.
Well, Jennifer, is there anything else that we didn't talk about, that we didn't discuss tonight?
I think we've done pretty well. I just, we always appreciate the public's interest. There are, lots of organizations doing this kind of work, but not so many that are nonprofit and able to provide it pro bono. So there's a real need for that, and we're happy to fill that need. And we definitely appreciate the public support and appreciate the opportunity to share this information with your viewers, Courtney.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us tonight and providing this critical information, and a lot of good information too.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you. So that was the DNA Doe Project. I'm going to pull up their website right here. Let's do full screen so you can see everything. So they've been around for more than 7 years now, and they've been able to solve 200 plus cases. What's nice about their website is that you can go on here, and not only can you give so that they can continue to help solve these cases, but also you can see the success stories as well on everyone who they've been able to identify. And then active cases, the cases that they are still looking to identify right here. And so they highlight all of these cases, and you can click on the case and it tells you all about when the body was found, the estimated age. So this is all on the DNADoeProject.org. And you can see just pages and pages of these John and Jane Doe cases. So a lot of good information right there about the DNA Doe Project. And again, you can visit their website, dnadoeproject.org, and you can find all of the active cases that they have. And then also, if you're interested in donating to help them, help law enforcement in solving these cases, that's also available on their website. I want to thank you all for joining us this Monday evening, not Tuesday night. So for Crime Unveiled with Courtney Bennett, we'll be back next week, actually on Tuesday nights, with an all new opportunity to talk about crime and Crime Unveiled. So again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.